to become law. So the proposals were never going to be, nobody took them as likely to become the law of the land. Now, if the terms of the Affordable Care Act, even those parts that only influence the budget and can be passed by a majority of 51 in the Senate, even if only those things go through, the Affordable Care Act spills over to the whole health system, because the very same institutions, the same academic research institutions that do all that NIH research are also providers of health care, and a much higher fraction of their budget comes from goods and services under the health sector. So what we're doing with the payment under Medicare, Medicaid, the VA health system, the Indian Health Service, TRICARE, the military health system, and all these other things that are controlled by the federal government are going to spill over. And there is consensus, and in fact, I think there's a bipartisan consensus that there were problems in the Affordable Care Act and it needed to get fixed. The insurance markets are highly unstable right now, even if the law were not changed. But now, with the repeal looming over it, the replace part becomes really important, and there's a hugely difficult political problem to be solved, which is not consensus on the problem, which is easy. The healthcare system is a mess, but consensus on how to fix it. That has been elusive for over a century. The Affordable Care Act was probably the high watermark of federal intervention into trying to fix the healthcare system. And now we're going to go back through a debate that's going to happen in a very, very short time, because it has to if repeal goes forward. It's going to have to be replaced by something, because that's a lot of dollars, a lot of jobs, and a lot of livelihoods that are at stake in the reform of the Affordable Care Act. So that's going to spill over, and I think that's going to completely dominate discussion about health policy and health care policy for probably the next year to 18 months. NIH and other things are very important, but I think they're going to be relatively diminished in their national profile relative to how they've been in the past. President Obama was probably the single most attentive president to biomedical research that we've had in recent history. And I think what we're going to see now is actually it's not going to be such a priority. The one thing, the saving grace for the National Institutes of Health and Biomedical Research more generally, is actually both parties are against cancer, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, and other diseases. So there is some hope out there, and I will just end with that.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, so any questions for Bob there in the front?
I'm Noel Rubenson from Brown University. This is a question for anyone, but probably mostly for Bill. How would you rate the possibility of the new administration terminating existing grants, possibly in some areas?
Look, I think the timetable here is that it's going to be complicated enough for the administration to deal with FY18 and getting a budget together for FY18 without revisiting FY17, right? So to the extent that there's a window here and grants have previously been issued and come about during FY17, and FY17 will, I would guess, likely be settled by a continuing resolution, I think that's a very difficult and complicated process. That's not to say that in some particular areas, areas of grant making won't be revisited. I think that will occur, but particularly in the context of FY18. So, I mean, there are parts of the R&D system, the two biggest parts, the two biggest R&D entities, the Department of Defense and NIH, I think are actually in pretty, good shape. The Department of Defense is going to have a significant increase. My guess is that the R&D system is not going to be singled out to be hit. I don't think the Congressional Armed Services Committees want that to happen and won't let it happen. I think there will be rising boats there, and R&D will, in the defense R&D sector, be okay. And from a point of view of university science, that's the so-called S&T budget within that total R&D budget. That's about $12 billion for so-called 6.1, 6.2, 6.3. That's basic research through applied research, through very early stage development. So those categories in defense, I think, are going to be okay, and that's where university defense research is located. I think Bob is exactly right. There is bipartisan consensus on the importance of medical research. We just saw that from the 21st Century Cures bill that he just went through. Even if the domestic discretionary budget is hit with a significant across-the-board cut, and we've seen previews of that happening, I do think Congress in some ways is going to find a way to rescue the life science R&D system in significant part. But I think what's at risk are the substantial group of other agencies and other programs, and I think that's where the real telling issues will come for FY18.
Yes.
I mean, Bob, you may have thoughts on that.